Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I'm, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger, as if it would be anybody else. Actually, I wouldn't mind having somebody else host the podcast once in a while if I go on vacation or something like that, but I'm afraid my fear is that whoever I pick to co-host is just gonna be so much better than me that when I come back from vacation, you guys will be like, hey man, your buddy Nate killed it on the last podcast. We want him back. Nuts. Anyways, welcome back to the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I have a couple things I wanted to talk about today. First of which, before I forget, I uploaded the last podcast to my YouTube channel where I talked about what I thought to be the most intriguing developments of the keynote of WWDC 2020. Yes, WWDC is a week-long thing. But from the keynote and Apple's transition to their own SoCs, their own system on chips, and the transition, the 2-year roadmap of a transition away from Intel to Apple's own silicon used in their own products. Right now, of course, Apple SoCs are used in the iPhones and the iPads and other various products, Apple TV and what have you. Of course, their Apple Watch. But this is more the transition to MacBook Pros and other iMacs and the PC devices, computer devices, desktop devices, and laptops. So in the comment section of that video, someone brought up the point of, could this mean that in the future we could see touchscreen options for a new MacBook, possibly a MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, maybe offered a touchscreen across the board? Because going to ARM, Apple using the same, well, not the same processors, but the same architecture across all products. So that means with your iPad Pro or any iPad and your MacBook Air. Let's just say you have an iPad Pro and you have a MacBook Pro, 13-inch MacBook Pro, and they're both running off the same ARM architecture, the same Bionic chips. Apple did announce in the keynote, did mention that this means that apps will be supported across all platforms. So, for instance, if you open the same Instagram app that runs on your iPhone, the exact same app will be available in the App Store and run on your 13-inch MacBook Pro. And that raises the question, which is what this commenter was getting at. Almost all, I would say, if not every single app that is available for iPad and for the iPhone relies on touch, obviously, because that is mostly the only interface you're going to have with those products. You have the Apple Pencil, yes, and you can have some sort of mouse support, at least on the iPads. But let's get real, it's all based on touch. So if the same apps run on both platforms, on the iPad and the iPhone and your MacBook Pro 13-inch, an app that relies on touch. Yes, you can, of course, click with the mouse, and let's say you're using Instagram on your 13-inch MacBook Pro. Of course, you'd be able to click with your mouse and drag and scroll through the pictures or whatever. But it's much more intuitive to use touch. So could that mean, because all the apps rely on touch, most of the apps anyways rely on touch, could that mean that we'd finally see touchscreens coming to Apple notebooks, Apple laptops? Could the MacBook Air or a MacBook come back with a touchscreen? I think if the touchscreens were going to come back, I think if Apple was going to offer a touchscreen, I do think that if they brought back the MacBook, that's probably where we would first see the touchscreen. That might be their test bed for that feature. Could possibly come to the MacBook Pro, could possibly come to the MacBook Air. We'll see. That is if Apple ever offers touchscreens at all. Up to this date, outside of their iPhones and iPads, they haven't had touchscreens on any of their computers, obviously. And that has been one of the main outcries from their consumer base is every single one of your competition, all the other manufacturers, MSI, Asus, whatever, Razer, they all have touchscreen support. So why wouldn't Apple offer touchscreen support? They obviously have the technology for touchscreens. They were some of the main pioneers in that technology. Now, of course, they didn't invent touchscreen technology, but with the iPhone, the first smartphone to rely on the touchscreen at the time, remember, Steve Jobs said that he thought styluses or styli were unnecessary and gross, and he didn't want to have anybody to carry around a stylus with their phone because we all have a built-in stylus. And he held up his finger and he started touching the phone. My, how times have changed. Now they want over $100 for Apple pencils. We're back to the stylus again. Anyways, all I'm saying is Apple obviously has the technology for touchscreens. So why, oh why, now that the apps will work on MacBooks, iOS apps and iPad OS apps work on MacBooks, why wouldn't they bring touchscreen at that point? All their competition has it. It's something that I've seen a lot of Apple users cry out for many years. Now, I think ultimately I'm in this boat where I was about to say I've never had a laptop with touchscreen support, but that's not true at all. I have several convertibles that obviously use touchscreen. I have an old Microsoft Surface Pro, which is still great. It's a Surface Pro 3. Still use it almost daily. It is a great little computer, even all these years later. All these years, like I'm 90 years old. A few years later, that has a wonderful touchscreen on it. I have a Dell Venue. I have two Dell Venues. I have a Dell Venue 8 Pro and the 11 Pro. Are they both called Pro? But I have the Dell Venue 8 and the Dell Venue 11. The Venue 8 is a tablet. It's a Windows 10 tablet. It's pretty cool. I got it for like $100 at Micro Center. More of an experiment. 2 gigs of RAM and 32 gigabytes of eMMC storage. It's pretty blech. Quad-core Atom processor. Like I said, it's an experiment. I feel like Star Trek when I'm carrying it around. Like it's a communicator, not a communicator. You get what I'm saying. My geek brain is going 1,000 miles a minute right now. But the Surface has the touch. I have PCs and notebooks that use the touchscreen. But for my main workhorse laptop, which is still, as of this point, an MSI GS43 VR with a GTX 1060 and a Core i7 inside there. For my main workhorse laptops, just a traditional laptop, not convertibles, not a tablet that has a magnetic keyboard that attaches to it, but just for a mainline, mainstream laptop, I have not gone touchscreen, and I have actively avoided getting touchscreen on my workhorse laptops. And I think it all boils down to a personal preference thing. I probably hear more people singing the praises of having a touchscreen on a laptop than I hear people who don't like it. When I have the touchscreen, like on the Microsoft Surface Pro, I do use it. I wonder what this kind of psychological disconnect is, that I don't want a touchscreen on my main workhorse traditional laptop, but obviously I do want it on a convertible because it wouldn't be a convertible without a touchscreen. Now, usually manufacturers offer the touchscreen as a choice. I have just never used that choice. My next laptop, it's not that important to me on a main workhorse, mainstream laptop to have a touchscreen. If I did have it, yes, it would be great for scrolling through web pages and reading, possibly for mixing music. Bring up the virtual console, basically have all your channels and faders there and be able to kind of close your eyes and mix like you're supposed to. For audio engineers out there who have been born and raised and in the box, so to speak, that have never sat at a real music recording console, you're supposed to mix with your ears. And I know that that sounds kind of stupid and pedantic, and you mostly know that. You're supposed to mix with the ears, but I think when we kind of are so used to a mouse pointer moving on a screen, and so I fall into this trap myself. I say, okay, I know the values for this effect. I know the threshold for the compressor should be set so that the output gain comes down to whatever, or the noise reduction goes down to about 6 decibels, rather than just completely relying on my ear. Now, what we do, I can only speak for myself, and we'll get off the audio engineer kick in a second here, but I'll get to the value where I want it. And at that point, yes, I'll close my eyes, or I won't look at the screen, and I'll just listen to what it sounds like. Because if you just go by what the values say on the screen, that can mean that it doesn't sound very good. That could mean that the compressor is over compressing. It's pumping too much. The attack and release isn't set just right. The knee isn't set just right. The ratios aren't set just right. So you do still, no matter what settings you set it at, you do still have to close your eyes and listen. You have to feel what the program material is giving you. You have to feel what the music is giving you. You have to feel what the speech is giving you. You have to feel what the noises are giving you, the sounds are giving you, how they make you feel. You can't just EQ something by looking at it. You don't mix a song with your eyes. You mix a song with your ears. So at every certain point, you have to close your eyes and listen. So the way that ties back into touchscreens is, I fancy myself, if I had a big enough touchscreen, like a 14-inch screen or 15-inch screen, whatever, putting my fingers, 4 or 5 of my fingers on the drum mix and basically feeling it. Okay, let's just use 2 fingers here, and I'm closing my eyes as I'm saying this. Put my index finger on the snare drum and my middle finger on the kick, and just move my index finger and middle finger up and down with my eyes closed, touching the touchscreen, listening for the perfect balance with my ears and my heart of what the balance between the kick and snare should be. That's something I would probably more likely do if I have a touchscreen laptop. If my next laptop has a touchscreen, I can talk all this hot air into the microphone about what I do with that touchscreen in the mixing environment, in the music mixing environment, but I don't know until I actually use it, and until I'm actually in that scenario. I have Pro Tools and Cakewalk Sonar on my Surface 3 Pro, whatever it is. And I can't honestly say that I've ever brought up the mixing console, and mixed with my fingers on there. Partly maybe it's because the 10-inch screen just isn't big enough. There are recording studios out there that have gigantic 43-inch, 50-inch, whatever, giant touchscreen monitors that they replace the analog console with, so that they can put their fingers on faders on the screen and moving them around individually. That's really cool. That really feels like a Star Trek console right there. Here in the radio station, we don't have any digital consoles, but I know there's other iHeart studios that do have those types of digital consoles. Some of them replace the console completely and just have a big iPad sitting there that you run the radio station with. And I don't trust that at all. I do not trust that in the slightest, for many reasons, but one critical reason that I won't get into here. Actually, you know what? I will. I will mention this because I don't think it's not proprietary. It's nothing major. A lot of other companies have already done this. Outsourcing of IT. At iHeart, we used to have in-house IT in all the radio stations, or in most radio stations. I can only speak definitely for here in Houston, which is a major market, a size 6 market. It's the 3rd biggest money-making iHeart branch outside of New York City and Los Angeles. It's Houston. It's a huge market here. And we had in-house IT. We had a couple of guys who would deal with IT issues instantly as they occurred, and it was a wonderful thing. Like so many other companies, iHeart outsourced the IT. So we still have IT, but now it's way more of an issue of trouble tickets. Now you're talking to somebody, if you can get a live person on the phone, you're talking to somebody in another city, in another state, halfway across the country. You no longer have an IT department here that can address a problem instantly. So that's what I was saying is, if you're running a radio station off of an iPad, if you're just completely getting away from analog control of something like a radio station and you're relying on more computers and tablets, and you've also outsourced IT, that sounds like a bad recipe. I don't trust it personally. So now me saying that, they might come in here tomorrow and be like, hey, guess what? We are replacing the console at KPRC with an iPad. Fine. That's fine. It would be a concern, especially since IT is no longer in the building. But I don't make those decisions. I'm just happy to be employed in the radio business during a pandemic. Let's be real here. I'm a freaking unicorn to have a full-time job in radio. I work, as for those of you who don't know, I board op on our sister station from noon to 8 p.m. At KTRH, which is the biggest AM radio station in Houston. It's a 50,000 watt, we call it the flamethrower. It covers a gargantuan region of basically this country, not just the Houston area, but it's a sizable chunk of the country that you can hear 740 AM broadcasting from. I run that control center from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. That also means if you're in our affected area and you ever hear the emergency alert system interrupting even your TV shows and definitely your radio broadcast, no matter what radio station you're just listening to, you could be listening to the Christian radio station that's based up in Humble, KSBJ. If there's an emergency alert, a severe thunderstorm, flash flood, and you hear those tones go, and here's an emergency alert, severe thunderstorm, that's me. That's me overriding the entire freaking region of the country to put out that alert. So I apologize if you're watching Jersey Shore and those tones start going across your TV between the hours of noon and 8 p.m. Central Time in this area of the country. That's me. I'm sorry. I have to do it. I don't want to call it PTSD because I don't want to make light of PTSD. But during Hurricane Harvey, I put out literally, it must have been 200 EAS alerts, just nonstop. Just me on my shift, working for, I think it was 12-hour shifts that we were doing. I think it was something like that. It was at least 8 or 12-hour shifts. We did hundreds of them. We couldn't catch our breath with how many EAS we were putting out. And it's like, yeah, we know it's raining. Do we need another emergency alert about flooding in the same area? We know. We've already done 12 alerts in the past 5 minutes about flooding in this part of the city. They keep updating it like every 30 seconds, extending the flash flood warning every 30 seconds. It's so many. Eventually, the weather service, the NWS and NOAA reached out and said, hey, there's no way you can keep up with all these alerts. So we won't mess with you with fines, because technically you can be fined something like $1 million and lose your broadcast license if you don't get all these EAS alerts out. But the amount of alerts were just stacking on top of each other. We would be airing an alert while 2 more were coming in. There was no way to air everything that was coming at us during Hurricane Harvey. And sorry, I'm getting all fired up about this, but it was a very fascinating time. Just letting you know what I do over on our sister station, KTRH. I'm going to pause it here because there's something just jammed down my gullet. Okay, we'll see if that fixed anything. I still feel it in there. Anyways, yeah, so that's kind of the epicenter of KTRH, what board ops do at KTRH, and it's probably why we'll never have an iPad running the entire station. I would imagine an iPad or a small touchscreen interface running the entire station is for a smaller market, would work better in a smaller market where the system is running an automation 20 hours of the day. Maybe they have a morning drive live show coming in there, and the rest of the day it's Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Coast to Coast AM and what have you. But I would imagine running a small station in automation for at least 20 hours a day, yeah, you could get away with running it off of an iPad. I'm not going to let you behind the scenes too much to know what the proprietary software is that we use at KTRH, at least in this sector of iHeart. But it's kind of like I can equate it to glorified iTunes. It's basically a playlist. If you've ever watched a TV show that's based in a radio station, I know there's some radio shows and morning talk shows now that basically just put cameras inside of a radio studio and just pan around to the different hosts of the radio show. If you look at their screens, you can see what we're using. It's just basically a playlist that you can manipulate on the fly. And that's what we use. So that's fine for a smaller station in automation, 20 hours of the day. If you're just going to put that software or a variant of it or a different type of proprietary software on that iPad and run it, and IT is 1,000 miles away, fine. I just don't think we're going to see it in Houston. But at any rate, talking about running a radio station off of an iPad is a long rabbit trail deriving from the main road of touchscreen support possibly for MacBooks in the future, since apps will run natively across the iPhone, the iPad, and coming soon, MacBooks on custom Apple ARM SoCs. Could we see touchscreen Macs in the future, in the near future? I think possibly. It's always the answer of possibly yes the answer has been possibly yes for a decade. The answer has been possibly yes since the iPhone came out, and I think, what was that, 2008 or 2009, around there, 2007, something like that, late before 2010. Since Apple launched the touchscreen technology, and yes, you can say, oh well, what about the Apple Newton? And the question of will Apple release touchscreen support for their laptops soon? That's been the answer for many, many years, if not decades. But now I think it's more encouraged. I think it's even more likely if there's a little status levels. Like, remember the terrorism levels? Where it's green for there's no threat of terrorism today. Now it's yellow. There's a slightly increased threat of terrorism. Now it's orange, a high risk of terrorism, and then red, imminent terrorist attack in the next day or two. They're doing the same thing with COVID-19 now. Different, at least in Houston, different threat levels of transmission. But if we're on that kind of chart of is there going to be imminent touchscreens coming to MacBooks soon, I think it's ticked up from yellow, which was like maybe, to orange. I think now that custom Apple SoCs are coming to the mainstream notebooks and laptops, I think that touchscreen support for those MacBooks is in the orange. I think it's likely in the next couple of years. The last thing I'll say about Apple before we move on here to game streaming news is the roadmap to bring Apple SoCs to said MacBooks and other products in Apple's product line. It's a 2-year roadmap. So the first desktop PC that has Apple SoC in it right now, the A12Z or whatever, the same thing that's in the iPad Pro, is the iMac developers kit, basically, that they're going to give to developers that developers can buy. It's a limited quantity. I can't buy one. I can't get one. The average Joe can't just go out and buy an iMac with a custom Apple SoC in it right now, an iMac. That's for developers only. But the first mainstream computer, we've speculated it to be MacBook Pro 13, I think is the best guess right now for the official first MacBook Pro with custom Apple SoC is most likely going to be a 13-inch MacBook Pro before the end of 2020. That's the best speculation. I'm still crossing my fingers that they reintroduce the MacBook, just the base level MacBook with custom Apple SoC. I hope that's a big surprise coming before the end of the year. But right now, from sources I've heard from all accounts across the internet and from people who know more than I do, is that the MacBook Pro 13-inch is likely the first mainstream MacBook Pro or MacBook in general to get custom Apple SoCs. That being said, the roadmap is 2 years before a much bigger rollout, before a complete transition away from Intel. And I think that's interesting. How Apple said that the roadmap to transition away from Intel is 2 years. Does that mean that there might... See, it's still hard for me to picture a Mac Pro, with 32 cores or whatever in it, right now using an Intel Xeons and what have you. It's hard for me to picture that a machine like that going away from x86 anytime soon. So when Apple says this is a 2-year roadmap to transition away from Intel, does that mean that AMD would be that stopgap? Would that mean that the next Mac Pros are going to be based on AMD? And I'm just speculating here. I'm just completely wondering. I'm tossing that into the wild. It's a rhetorical question to everybody listening. And thank you again for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. And thank you for telling your friends about it too. That's organic growth is going to be the biggest key factor for growing anything. So if you're telling your friends about Geek Therapy Radio, thank you very much. But I'm asking this rhetorical question to you. Do you think that somewhere in the transition from Intel to Apple's in-house silicon, do you think AMD's in there at some point as a stepping stone? I wouldn't be surprised if the next Mac Pros have AMD Threadrippers in there. That when we have Zen 3 coming out and whatever else is down the road in the next couple of years coming from AMD, and Intel continues to, let's be real here, struggle to keep up with AMD at this point, with all the momentum is going AMD's way, do you think that we'll see Macs with AMD? Here's why I think we could. For one thing, this 2-year roadmap means that we are still going to get new releases from Apple based on x86, likely Intel. That means that the next update to the MacBook Pro 16 is probably still going to be on the next generation of Intel chips, or a half generation, a tick or talk, whatever, of Intel chips. We're still going to get new product releases over the next 2 years at least that are going to be based on x86. Why it makes sense to me, and I know probably most of you listening who are into Apple know where I'm going with this. I think it makes sense to go to AMD in the very near future within this 2-year roadmap, because Apple already uses AMD GPUs. And what a more appropriate pairing within the computer to pair an AMD CPU with an AMD GPU. To pair Vega graphics or RDNA, whatever, big Navi graphics with an AMD processor inside there, or an AMD APU. Maybe the base model MacBook Pro oh my gosh, as I say that would be just the cream dream. If the next 13-inch MacBook Pro had the next generation of Ryzen APU in there, and we finally had discrete graphics, well, for the first time in a long time at least, in a 13-inch MacBook Pro. What a powerhouse beast it would be, even more so if it had an AMD APU in there with, let's say, a quad-core, possibly an 8-core processor, 16 threads, and a few compute units, AMD graphics compute units, a few Vega cores or whatever. I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head. But you get what I'm saying. Integrated graphics or dedicated graphics in a 13-inch MacBook Pro. If part of the stepping stone going away from Intel or going to Apple SoCs is that they adopt AMD in the meantime, and if they adopt AMD in the meantime, why not just put an AMD APU in a MacBook Pro 13-inch? That would be amazing. And it's one of those things that you wonder, why wouldn't they do that? What would be stopping them from doing it? Maybe they have a contractual obligation. I don't know what they've got going on with Intel that says that's prohibiting them from doing that. But it would make all the sense in the world. Here's what I'm getting at with this. It would make all the sense in the world for Apple to release in the interim, while they are on x86 for a little while we have a few in the middle products here in that transition, in the two-year transmission that has an AMD APU inside of a MacBook Pro 13-inch. CPU or APU or both inside a MacBook Pro 13-inch or 16-inch. It makes all the sense in the world to do that. But me saying that, there have been so many instances, so many times in Apple's history where you think, well, it makes all the sense in the world for them to do that, but then they never do it. or it takes way too long to do it. I don't ever count Apple out for that. This is what seems obvious, Apple. This is where the obvious progression seems. It seems obvious that you're going to implement this feature in the next product, and they don't. They don't. My goodness. How many years, couple years at least, did we say, okay, Apple, this butterfly keyboard sucks. It would make complete sense for you just to go back to the old mechanism. Just do it. It makes total sense. Abandon the butterfly. What are you doing? You're digging yourself a deeper hole here. Just go back to the magic keyboard mechanism or whatever. And they didn't. They hold out. No, we're going to keep doing it this way. We're just going to keep doing it this way. So I never count Apple out from the expectation that they are not going to do what's obvious. I don't know why me mentioning that brings this to mind. I don't know how many of you watched a recent Linus Tech Tips video in which they're trying to get more performance out of a MacBook Air. That they had this notion that MacBook Air is leaving a lot of performance on the table, that if maybe we just cool the CPU better, we can get more performance. They wound up getting like 10 or 15% more performance out of it. The power delivery to the CPU in the MacBook Air, it just isn't that robust. So getting it much more beyond 25 watts for any period of time, much beyond 10 watts even, 12 watts even, is kind of, the Air couldn't do it. But anyways, what they found, and it's no mystery to anybody who has a MacBook Air, as you take the bottom plate off, you see that the fan is not touching the CPU. The fan, the exhaust fan, the cooling fan is nowhere near the CPU. The CPU just had the heatsink on the CPU in a MacBook Air that is a good 4 inches away from the fan, not connected by any heat pipes at all. The fan is basically just taking hot air from inside the chassis out. It's not connected to the CPU, which is generating most of the heat. It's a baffling design flaw, and you think, Apple, it would be obvious for you just to put at least a small fan on this very tiny paper-thin wafer of a copper heatsink that you have on the Intel CPU in the MacBook Air. It would make way too much sense to have active air cooling on a CPU processor, wouldn't it? Isn't that a novel idea? Active cooling of a CPU processor. It would be revolutionary if Apple had thought of that. What industry game changers they would be, industry leaders, that they actually had in their MacBook Air a heatsink that was attached, at least with a heat pipe, to a fan. But they didn't do it in the MacBook Air. Yes, I know in MacBook Pros, MacBook 13s, everything, there heat pipes, and they do it correctly. Well, correctly for the most part in those products. The MacBook Air, nope. Heatsink all by itself, just soaking up heat. There's really no movement over that heatsink. Makes no sense. Makes absolutely no sense why they would do that. It would be too obvious. Actively cool the CPU in your MacBook Air. It's called the MacBook Air. So move air over the heatsink. Whatever. Whatever. But Linus did bring up a good point there that I have heard echoed. Actually, I heard this, not a rumor, but this conspiracy theory before I ever saw that video, is that possibly, do you think, this is a rhetorical question to anybody listening who isn't aware of this conspiracy theory yet, do you think it's possible that Apple has been crippling their Intel processors over the past several years on purpose? Do you think that Throttlegate was on purpose? And I don't mean on purpose for, well, whatever. Do you think that across the board, Apple has been leaving performance on the table? Because they've demonstrated, not just Linus Tech Tips, but other users have demonstrated, hey, if you cool these processors better, you can get like 20, 30% more performance out of these chips. So what is Apple doing inadequately cooling these processors, not letting these processors stretch their legs, used to their full potential? Do you think that Apple's doing that on purpose? Here's the rhetorical question. Do you think that Apple's doing that on purpose so that when they do launch the MacBook Pro with their custom Apple SoCs, they can say, we have 1,000% the performance versus the old processor? Do you think? Because that performance jump wouldn't be that great if the Intel chips were cooled properly to begin with. We see similar Intel chips. It's not exactly. Sometimes Apple uses different SKUs, custom SKUs of Intel chips in their processors, like in the MacBook Air, I believe, uses a custom SKU. But the MacBook Pro 2018, the infamous Throttlegate MacBook Pro 15-inch 2018 Core i9, that was a, 9800 HK, 8900? It doesn't matter. The same processor was used in other gaming laptops of the day from different companies, Asus, MSI, Razer, all of them used that same processor that was in the MacBook Pro 15-inch of 2018. Didn't have the same throttling issues when cooled properly in other gaming notebooks as it had overheating issues and throttling issues in the MacBook Pro 15-inch from 2018. So do you think Apple, across the board, not just in 2018, but this current MacBook Air, just for as an example, is leaving at least 15, 20, 30% of the performance headroom on the table through inadequate cooling? Do you think that inadequate cooling is on purpose so that they can do a marketing campaign promoting their Apple SoC, saying, look how much more powerful our SoCs? Actually, they're not going to say it like that. They're not going to say more powerful than the outgoing Intel processors. They're going to say more performance. There's a difference because that's not technically lying. Well, you're getting more performance. I mean, for all the reasons I've mentioned in earlier podcasts, yes, it's better performance per watt, all that good stuff. It's good. Going to ARM processors and Apple products is good. But do you think they're going to milk the performance aspect a little bit because they've been purposely sandbagging Intel chips for years? This is big business, and it's possible. I do think it's possible. I'm not saying Apple is definitely doing that, but it is possible that they've been purposefully sandbagging, you could say detuning, Intel processors for the past few years on purpose because they want it to be more of an impressive performance jump when they go to Apple SoCs. It is possible. It is possible. So that's it for Apple news for now. I think that's all I wanted to touch on with Apple. I want to move on now to Mixer. Mixer is a game streaming service, not like NVIDIA. It's not like GeForce Now. It's not like Google Stadia, but games like Twitch. You broadcast yourself playing a video game out to your audience. It's like YouTube, except it's just live streaming for the most part. And you can watch your favorite video game players play Call of Duty or play PUBG or play Overwatch or whatever. Microsoft announced Mixer a few years ago, but the biggest announcement for Mixer came not even a year ago when they signed over Twitch's biggest streamer, Ninja, Tyler Blevins. I've talked about this in a past episode, if not a couple past episodes, maybe a year and a half or so ago, whenever this news was coming out, about Ninja making the move to Mixer for a reported $20 million contract. This was about 10 months ago that Ninja signed that contract with Mixer for $20 million in an effort to bring more viewers and audience to Microsoft's games live streaming platform Mixer. Not even a year ago. Microsoft has announced that Mixer didn't work and they're folding it into Facebook. Now Mixer is they've sold it to Facebook or given Facebook all the rights to it. It didn't work out the way they thought it would with Microsoft, and now it's going to be part of Facebook. Mixer is still going to be here. It's going to be part of Facebook. What does that mean for a $20 million contract that Ninja just signed 10 months ago? He hasn't officially announced what that means yet. My guess is that Facebook will honor it. That there's going to be there's going to be lawyers involved. You know that. There's going to be a whole lot of renegotiation of contracts and lawyers involved. But I don't think Ninja's going to be getting screwed. Ninja does, although, now that I mentioned that, he does apparently have, I don't want to call it free agency, but he is free. I'm reading this little blurb from Ars Technica. Quote, Microsoft has since confirmed that everyone signed to those Mixer exclusivity deals is now contractually free to stream wherever they see fit. Though further terms, including any suspension of payment due to Mixer's impending shutdown, has not been confirmed. As of press time, Blevins has yet to announce where he'll take his live-streamed gameplay sessions, either to Facebook, Twitch, or elsewhere. My guess, just my gut guess here, is that he would go back to Twitch. But that's still, the $20 million contract, what does that mean? Is he still going to get the payout from that? How does this all work? I don't know how that all works. The takeaway here is that Mixer didn't work, and it's going to be part of Facebook, and anybody who is signed to exclusivity deals with Mixer is now free to roam, free to sign a contract with other platforms or live stream on other platforms. So we'll see. This is all kind of shaken out right now. What did I want to say about that? Just that, oh yeah. Microsoft had put such an effort behind Mixer that on Xbox consoles, when you tap the X once, it brought up options to start streaming instantly to Mixer, because Mixer was a Microsoft live streaming platform. Now it's not going to be anymore. So what's that mean for Xbox, Series X? What upcoming updates for Xbox? What they're going to map the button to do now? Whatever. It's kind of embarrassing. Now, on the Xbox consoles, you weren't locked into just streaming to Mixer. You could stream to other platforms, not just exclusively Mixer. But I believe pressing that button once brought up the option pretty clearly to start streaming to Mixer. Like the idea of streaming to Twitch or to YouTube or something like that it didn't force you into that the way it obviously was like, hey, we got our own service here. You should use our own service. We'll see how this all shakes out. I just think it's fascinating. It's interesting how hard they were pushing Mixer not even a year ago. $20 million contract with Ninja. Ninja, you were blowing it up on Twitch. Please come play for Mixer. And then, and a year later, they pull out the plug. Is that due to global pandemic? I don't know. I haven't seen any mention of that in any article that I've read about this. Why made this decision? I honestly, you know what I think it is? This is just me, just my opinion. I think that the market just got saturated. I think that the live streaming market just got saturated with platforms. And it's settling into an ecosystem that can maintain itself. It's settling into live streaming directly to Facebook, live streaming directly to YouTube, and of course, live streaming directly to Twitch. I think it's kind of where if there were 7 or 8 different live streaming platforms, the ecosystem couldn't sustain it all. The market couldn't sustain it all. So now it's gonna let's do something that's more maintainable. That's just my opinion on it. That's just what I think is happening, and it's something that I think might happen at some point with on-demand video streaming. I think that there's so many platforms right now. It's almost Hulu and Netflix and YouTube constantly wants you to buy YouTube Premium. Amazon Video. There's so many platforms. Disney Plus. There's so many video streaming platforms that piracy is going up. On a kind of separate but related note, because there's so many. Because there's so much of a fracturing of on-demand video services, piracy is going up. For instance, people who wanted to watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on Netflix, now Sunny in Philadelphia has gone to Hulu, and shows go off to different platforms. And now if you want to watch those shows, you got to pay another $15 a month to get Hulu. You got to pay another $15 a month to get Netflix. If you want this show, you got to pay another $15 a month. If you want HBO Go and then Showtime and Amazon Prime Video, you got to rent stuff or pay more subscription. Like, it's so much. People that said screw it. I'm just going to pirate It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia now. I'm not going to pay $15 a month just to watch a show that I've already paid for, basically. It's crazy. So this fracturing of on-demand video services, this fracturing of live stream video game play. Twitch isn't just you don't have to just Twitch stream yourself playing Mario Brothers. People can Twitch themselves drumming. There's drummers and musicians on Twitch. But my point is, there's so many services and so many platforms out there that I think the market is just correcting itself. And I think Mixer going down is just even though it's part of Microsoft, which is a huge company, I think it's just the market correcting itself. especially here in 2020 when things are so up in the air and willy-nilly. I think there's going to be a lot of corrections. My brother is my financial advisor, and one of his favorite words is, I think we're going to see a market correction. Anytime there's a big blooming, the stock market does really good, there's an impending correction. He doesn't call it recession. He will use the word recession. No one's being dumb about that. But before the pandemic, my brother was saying, well, typically what happens, because he studied finances, we have market corrections. Not to say a recession, even though that's what's happening now among the pandemic, but corrections. And I think the market, as far as the ecosystem of live streaming is concerned, is correcting itself. I think it's as simple as that. And I think that's going to do it for now. I was going to release a podcast yesterday about replacing the cooling fans in my DeLorean, but it was way too technical, and it was like 45 minutes long of talking about what nuts and bolts to remove. So I didn't do that, but I did upload the video of it to YouTube, so you can check that out, Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube. Check out the website. I've got the merch store on there now, geektherapyradio.com. It's also a way to get in contact with me directly. But most importantly, as always, know that you are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. And I don't just repeat that. Every time I say that, it's from the heart, and it's true. I've mentioned several times before, if you don't remember anything from any of these podcasts ever, if you stop listening tomorrow, if you never listen to another Geek Therapy Radio podcast ever again, the only words I want to rattle around in your brain is how I end every show. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of being loved. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of loving someone else. You are worthy of loving something else. And you are worthy of loving yourself. You are worthy of your own self-confidence. I just think that by indulging a little bit of geek therapy, finding out what you're good at, finding out what hobbies you like and things you like to indulge in creatively, that you put out into the world and that you work with your hands and that you do creatively, I think that through a little bit of that type of geek therapy, we gain some of that self-confidence and some of that self-worth. So I implore you to look into rekindling an old hobby, finding a new hobby, whatever it is, drawing with a pencil, watercolors, working on a car, working on your bicycle, getting your hands dirty, getting your hands greasy, cracking open the microphone and starting a podcast, programming, getting into buying a Raspberry Pi for $5 and setting that up and start to learn how to program in Python or whatever you want to do. Dust off your old video game system, fix it up, find something that you can put into this world that you can do with your hands and engage your mind. And I think that helps a lot. I don't know where I'm finding you in life. I don't know if I'm finding you in a deep depression right now, or you're doing pretty good and things are kind of sad. We know the world is very nervous and anxious right now, but let's say you are in a deep depression. I think a little bit of geek therapy there's no pill that you can take that cures depression. We know that. I've been depressed myself. There's no such thing as me sitting here saying, just get over it, bud. Just play some NES and you'll be all right. No, it doesn't work like that. But I think a little bit of geek therapy is a rung of the ladder swung down into the pit. And maybe all you need to get started is just grabbing that first rung. And it's the hardest thing in the world sometimes, is just to grab that first rung of the ladder or take that first step. And I think that by engaging your geek thing, because we're all geeks about something, engaging that geek thing could be the first step, could be your hand reaching up for the first rung of that ladder, first knot on that rope to try to start pulling yourself out of that. That's just what I believe. So you are worthy of love. And I think that's the biggest factor in this, is just knowing that, knowing you are worthy of love. Giving and receiving it. That when somebody tells you, hey, man, I love you, our first thought if you're depressed is, no, I'm not worthy of that. I'm so no one loves me. I am not worthy of that. And the last person in the world that you can accept love from a lot of the times is just yourself. If you're in that state of mind, you're probably avoiding the mirror or looking in the mirror too long. Possibly that's one symptom of it. I don't like that person in the mirror. That you could have 100,000 people. You can go to a stadium that's set up and says, maybe your name is Mark. it's Mark Day at the stadium, and you have 100,000 people in there, and you sit down in a recliner, and you have a nice cold drink, and you're ready, and 100,000 people walk by and say, Mark, I love you, dude. Man, I love you. That 100,000 people could do that, and you wouldn't believe it. You would never accept it. Or you would accept it. Yeah, hey, man, I know, thanks for saying that, but you wouldn't believe it. The only person that matters in that situation is you. Do you love yourself? Do you think, is there anything in there worth loving? And I'm not forcing you to see something like that right now, but I'm just saying that I think that geek therapy, not my, you know what I'm saying, not my podcast specifically, but just geek therapy in general, can help with that self-worth. And if you can help with the self-worth, then the next steps come easier. You start seeing value in yourself. Hey, yeah, I am worth getting off the couch today. I am worth doing my hair. I am worth shaving. I am worth brushing my teeth and going out in a mask right now. But hey, this girl wants to go on a date with me, or this guy wants to go on a date with me. And I didn't see it before, but you know what? I'm going to take a chance on myself. And maybe what knocks you in, gets you out of that rut to see something in yourself is that I replaced the screen on my Game Boy yesterday. I did something. It was a little thing. I replaced the plastic scratched up screen on my Game Boy with a nice hardened glass one. And I accomplished something. If it was a little something, but it's a little improvement in your life, yeah, I will go out to coffee with that girl. I will go out and get lunch with that guy. Whatever. And just go from there. I don't know. This can manifest itself in any sort of way, any increment, large or small. Just know that you're worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. If you never remember anything else from Geek Therapy Radio, just remember that. In your darkest moment, that Geek Therapy podcast I used to listen to used to say I'm worthy of love. Let's see if there's anything there worth exploring. Let it rattle around in your brain. Maybe it'll help you someday. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know what music I'm using to bump out right now, but it's probably something that kicks ass. And I will include it in the podcast description. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for listening. I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. Be safe.